A respected millionaire faces decades in prison. Accused of financial crimes he mysteriously refuses to contest. During the tense trial, when his conviction seems inevitable, an 8-year-old girl bursts into the courtroom crying desperately, "Please, don't take my daddy to prison." Shock fills the room. Everyone knows he has no children. When the judge tries to remove her, she refuses to leave and begins to reveal something that could change everything. What happens next will leave everyone speechless. The airport air was a thick mix of stale, recycled coffee, expensive perfume, and the silent anxiety of thousands of rushed goodbyes and hurried hellos. For Leah, sitting on the cold pavement outside the automatic glass doors, it smelled like a world she didn't belong to. At 10 years old, she was already an expert in making herself invisible, shrinking into her threadbare coat so the constant flow of hurried travelers saw her only as part of the urban landscape. A small blur of poverty to be ignored. Her eyes, however, were not invisible. They were sharp beacons, absorbing every detail with an intensity that betrayed her age. She watched people's posture, the way they limped, the subtle pallor in their skin. These were habits taught by her mother, a nurse whose wisdom was the only inheritance Leah had left. "Look for the signs, sweetie," her mother used to say, her voice soft as a balm. "The body always tells a story." Now, the stories Leah read in strangers' faces were her only company. Hunger gnawed in her stomach, a familiar, insistent creature, but it was the loneliness that truly hurt. Most people walked past her with their eyes fixed on their phones or lost in their own thoughts, creating an impenetrable bubble. But then one man stopped. He wasn't like the others. He wore a grey suit that looked like it cost more than everything Leah had ever owned, and his leather shoes gleamed even in the weak evening light. Yet it wasn't his obvious wealth that made her hold her breath. It was his gaze. He saw her. His eyes, a surprisingly gentle blue, held neither pity nor disgust, only sincere curiosity. He crouched down, a gesture that put him at her level, and the rushing world around them seemed to slow. "Hello," he said, his voice calm and deep. "My name is Arthur. What's yours?" Leah hesitated. Distrust a second skin she wore for survival. "Leah," she whispered, the words scratching her dry throat. He smiled, and the smile warmed something frozen inside her. "That's a beautiful name. Leah, you look hungry." He didn't wait for an answer. He pulled a crisp, folded $20 bill from his wallet. "Why don't you get yourself something to eat, something hot?" Leah's fingers trembled as they touched the paper. $20. It was more cash than she had seen in weeks. It was one hot meal, maybe two. It was the promise of a night without the sharp ache of hunger. "Thank you," she mumbled, her eyes watering. He simply nodded, stood up, and with one last gentle smile, walked through the glass doors, disappearing into the terminal's bright glow. Leah stayed there, clutching the bill like a treasure, her heart pounding wildly with a mixture of gratitude and astonishment. For the first time in a long time, someone had treated her like a person. Driven by an impulse she didn't understand, she crawled closer to the glass, wanting to engrave her benefactor's face onto her memory. She watched him walk through the concourse, a man whose fortune was evident in every confident stride. He stopped at a vending machine, inserted some coins, and grabbed a small bag of peanuts. A shiver ran down Leah's spine, a sudden, vivid memory of her mother explaining allergies. "Peanuts, Leah. For some people, it's like poison. It closes the throat in minutes." Arthur, oblivious to the potential danger he held, answered his cell phone. He gestured, immersed in a business conversation about investments and capital, as he distractedly ripped open the package. With the phone still pressed to his ear, he scooped a handful of peanuts into his mouth. The sound of his chewing inaudible through the glass, but the image terrifyingly clear to the girl, watching him with a rising, inexplicable dread. The cold glass pressed against her forehead was the only thing anchoring her to reality. On the other side, Arthur continued his call, his brow furrowed in concentration, discussing numbers Leah couldn't comprehend. Words like stocks, dividends, and net worth floated in inaudible fragments. For him, it was just another business day, managing the vast wealth that surrounded him like an invisible aura. For Leah, the bag of peanuts in his hand was a ticking time bomb. Every time he raised a handful to his mouth, her heart gave a painful leap. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, clear as the day she first heard the lesson. They were in their cramped apartment, the smell of disinfectant and sickness heavy in the air, while her mother, weak but lucid, showed her pictures in a medical book. Look, anaphylaxis, Leah, the face swells, the skin turns red, but the worst is here. She pointed to a diagram of the human throat. It all seals up. The person can't breathe. It's fast. Terrible. Arthur coughed. It was a small, discreet cough he tried to disguise, nodding to the person on the other end of the line as if nothing was wrong. But Leah saw it. She saw the way his free hand moved subtly toward his collar, as if it had suddenly tightened. He ate another peanut. The cough returned, stronger this time, a harsh sound that made a few heads briefly turn in his direction before they returned to their own concerns. Panic began to bubble up in Leah's chest, hot and sharp. She saw the color drain from his face, a reddish hue spreading across his cheeks and neck. He began to gesture more frantically into the phone, his voice now tense, hurried. He knew something was wrong. Leah's street instincts, sharpened by years of survival, screamed at her to stay quiet, stay invisible. No one wanted her here. Entering the terminal meant being thrown out, perhaps worse. The security guards were big and had no patience for kids like her. But then Arthur's eyes widened. The phone slipped from his hand, clattering on the polished floor. Both hands shot to his throat, fingers clutching his neck as if he could rip away the invisible force that was suffocating him. His chest heaved violently, but no sound came out except a sharp, terrifying wheeze. The people around him finally noticed. A circle of shocked, confused faces formed, but no one moved. They were paralyzed by uncertainty, by the fear of doing the wrong thing. To them, it was a stranger having a medical episode. To Leah, it was the man who had seen her, who had given her $20 and a glimpse of kindness. It was her mother's lesson come to life. In that instant, the conflict inside her dissolved. The fear of getting caught was nothing compared to the terror of watching a good man extinguish right before her eyes. The memory of her mother, the pain of not being able to save her, merged with the scene in front of her. This time, she knew what to do. She wouldn't stand by. Clutching the $20 bill in her pocket, the last remnant of his kindness, she got up. With a cry caught in her throat, she ran toward the glass doors, which opened with a soft whoosh, inviting her into the center of the disaster. Leah burst into the terminal like a small fury, pushing past the legs of paralyzed adults. The sound inside the concourse was a chaos of overlapping voices, sharp cries, confused murmurs, and the useless "someone call an ambulance" repeated like an impotent mantra. To Leah, it was all white noise. Her ears and eyes were tuned to a single frequency, the man on the floor. Arthur Graves was convulsing, his face swollen and a terrifying shade of purple. His eyes, once so gentle, were now wide with panic, and his lips had a bluish tinge that Leah instantly recognized from her mother's books. Cyanosis, lack of oxygen. The wheezing she had heard from outside was gone, replaced by an even more terrifying silence. His airway was completely closed. She knew what that meant. They had, at most, a couple of minutes. She knelt beside him, ignoring the gasps of the crowd that now noticed her, a dirty, street-level kid, touching the wealthy, well-dressed man. "He's choking!" shouted a woman. "Someone do the Heimlich!" A burly man tried to roll Arthur over, but his body was heavy and unresponsive. "It's not choking!" Leah's voice came out, surprisingly loud and steady. "It's his throat! It's closing up!" No one paid attention to her. To them, she was just a scared child, babbling nonsense. But Leah didn't need their permission. She needed action. Her mind was a whirlwind of nursing lessons, of late nights reading her mother's manuals while caring for her. She could see the diagrams in her head, the arrows showing airflow, the red X marking the obstruction. A memory of a specific conversation surged forward, her mother pointing to the trachea in a drawing. When all else fails, Leah, you need to create a new path for air below the blockage. It's a last resort, but it saves lives. A last resort. Time was running out. Arthur stopped struggling. His body went limp, a terrible sign that he was losing consciousness. Leah didn't hesitate. Her small hands began patting his suit pockets, desperately searching for something, anything. Coat pocket, nothing. Pants pockets, a thick wallet and a key ring. Useless. Then she saw it. Clipped to the inner breast pocket of his jacket, a slender silver metal pen with a fine, elegant point. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. She yanked it out. The crowd gasped collectively. The sight was shocking. The ragged girl, kneeling over the millionaire's body, wielding a sharp object. The narrative in their minds formed instantly. An attack, an inexplicable and brutal assault. The security guard shouted, "Drop that, kid! Get away from him now!" He was only a few yards away. Leah looked up for a fraction of a second, seeing the fear and anger in the faces around her. They didn't understand, but their understanding wouldn't save Arthur. Only action would. With one hand, she tilted his head back, exposing his neck. With the other, she used her thumb to locate the small, soft depression in his throat, the exact spot her mother had described, the cricothyroid membrane, the place where the cartilage was thin, the entryway. She held the pen like a dagger, the cold metal against her trembling fingers, and aimed for the spot that would save his life and that, she feared, could ruin hers. Time seemed to stretch and contract in that suspended moment. The security guard's shout was a distant sound, muffled by the frantic beat of Leah's heart in her own ears. The world shrank to that small point on Arthur's neck, the cold metal of the pen, and the firm memory of her mother's voice, steady but careful, with conviction. With a breath she didn't know she was holding, she pushed. There was resistance, the skin yielding beneath the metal tip, and then a small pop, almost inaudible amidst the chaos, but which reverberated throughout her body. She didn't pierce deep, just enough to puncture the membrane, creating an opening. For one terrifying second, nothing happened. Silence. Then, a sound. A faint, yet distinct whistle. The sound of air being sucked into Arthur's starved lungs. A whispered miracle. The bluish tone on his lips began to recede, replaced by a pale pink. His chest, previously still, moved with a shallow, ragged inspiration. He was breathing. A wave of relief so overwhelming swept through Leah that her legs weakened. She had done it. She saved him. The relief, however, lasted only a heartbeat. A woman's sharp scream pierced her bubble of concentration. My God, she stabbed him! The crowd's perception, distorted by panic, solidified into a horrifying certainty. Before Leah could even process the words, iron hands grabbed her arm, yanking her up with a force that made her bones ache. The silver pen, now stained with a single drop of blood, fell from her fingers and rolled across the floor with a metallic clink. I got you, you little menace. The security guard snarled in her ear, his breath hot with coffee and rage on her face. No! Wait! Leah cried, her voice shrill with panic. He's breathing! I helped! She turned desperately, trying to make them look. Look at him! But no one was looking at Arthur. All eyes were on her, full of horror and accusation. They saw only a wild-eyed street kid hovering over a helpless man with what looked like a weapon. The image was damning. The guard started dragging her away, her shoes scraping the polished floor. She fought, twisting in his grip. Please, I saved him. My mom taught me. Her words were shreds of sound, lost in the growing cacophony. She thought of the money he gave her, his kindness. He was a man of vast fortune, with businesses and assets that probably stretched across continents, but none of that mattered when the air wouldn't reach his lungs, and she had saved him. Why couldn't anyone see? As she was pulled toward a door marked restricted access, she saw, through the glass entrance doors, flashing red and blue lights. The EMTs. Help was arriving. They would know. They would understand what she had done. A thread of hope emerged in her chest. But hope was crushed as the guard roughly shoved her through the door, which closed behind them with a heavy, final click. The sound of the terminal was suddenly cut off, replaced by the cold silence of a sterile, windowless hallway. She was alone with her accuser, separated from the only person who could prove her innocence and the professionals who could confirm her heroism. The door that closed felt like a jail cell. The room they dragged her into was small, cold, and impersonal. It smelled of floor cleaner and old fear. A metal table, 2 chairs, and grey walls made up the entire scene of her new nightmare. The guard pushed her into one of the chairs with unnecessary force. "Stay there and don't move," he ordered, his voice filled with contempt. He stood guard near the door, arms crossed over his chest, treating her like a dangerous animal. Time crawled. Every second was an agony. Leah could hear sirens outside, the distant sound of hurried voices and the buzzing of equipment. The EMTs were with Arthur now. They would be caring for him, stabilizing him, rushing him to the hospital. They would see the small hole in his throat, the pen on the floor. Would they understand? Hope wrestled with panic in her chest. Minutes later, a man and a woman in police uniforms entered the room. Their faces were impassive, their eyes examining Leah with a professional coldness that made her shrink. "So this is our assailant," the female officer said, a tone of disbelief in her voice. "What's your name, girl?" Leah swallowed hard. "Leah." "Just Leah?" the male officer asked, opening a small notebook. "No last name. Where are your parents?" The question hit her like a punch. "My mom." "She's gone." "And your father?" Leah shook her head, her eyes fixed on the floor. The ensuing silence was heavy. She was a nobody, a child with no name, no family, an easy target. "Listen, Leah," the female officer began, her tone softening into a false sympathy Leah knew well. "We have dozens of witnesses out there. They all say the same thing. They saw you attack that man. You injured him with that pen." "No!" Leah protested, her voice choked. "I didn't attack him. He couldn't breathe. He ate peanuts. He's allergic. I opened a path for the air. My mother was a nurse. She taught me." The officers exchanged a look. It was a mixture of pity and skepticism, a fantastical story from a desperate street kid. "A nurse, huh?" the male officer said. "And she taught you to puncture people's throats with a ballpoint pen?" The humiliation burned in her cheeks. They didn't believe her. To them, the truth was what seemed most likely a street child, perhaps mentally unstable, assaulting a rich man. The social disparity between her and Arthur Graves was an abyss that no explanation, however true, could bridge. "You can talk to the paramedics," she insisted, clinging to that last hope. "They'll know. They'll see I helped." The female officer sighed. "We'll take care of that, Leah. But for now, you need to come with us. We have to take you somewhere safe." Safe place. The words were venom. Leah knew what that meant. A juvenile hall, a detention center, the kind of place she had run away from before, a place worse than the streets. Panic suffocated her, as real as Arthur's lack of air. "No, please. I didn't do anything wrong, I swear." Her pleas were useless. The male officer approached and, with a kindness that was almost crueler than the guard's brutality, took her arm. "Come on, kid. It's over." As they guided her out through a back door, away from the terminal's chaos, Leah's heart sank. The last thing she heard before the door closed was a paramedic's voice coming down the corridor. Loud and clear, full of urgency and astonishment. "That cricothyrotomy is perfect. Was that done in the field? Who the hell performed that here?" But the question was lost to the air, and Leah was led into the darkness. Her heroic action interpreted as a crime, her identity reduced to an anonymous aggressor. The juvenile detention center smelled of disinfectant and hopelessness. The walls, painted a sickly beige, seemed to absorb light and joy. Leah was taken to a small intake room where a tired-looking woman, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, asked a series of monotonous questions. Name, age, last meal. With every answer, Leah felt a layer of her identity being stripped away, replaced by a case number. She tried to explain again, the story spilling out in a desperate torrent about peanuts, allergies, and the silver pen. The woman simply typed into her computer, her face devoid of emotion. "All of this will be evaluated by your social worker, honey," she said, without looking up. The word honey sounded empty, a script memorized for dealing with troubled children. She was given a rough, shapeless grey uniform, and her belongings, the worn coat and the $20 bill Arthur had given her, were confiscated and put into a plastic bag. Watching the bill disappear was like losing the last connection to the kindness that had landed her in this situation. Meanwhile, miles away in a sterile hospital room, the chaos was of a very different nature. Arthur Graves woke up with the sensation of a knife in his throat and the sound of rhythmic beeps. A nurse hovered over him, adjusting an IV drip. The memory returned in confused flashes, the taste of peanuts, the sudden constriction in his chest, the blind terror of asphyxiation, and a face. The face of a young girl, with large, scared eyes, leaning over him. What happened?" he managed to croak, his voice a hoarse, painful whisper. The nurse smiled. "You had a very severe allergic reaction, Mr. Graves. Anaphylactic shock. You're extremely lucky. Someone at the airport performed an emergency cricothyrotomy on you. Saved your life." The word sounded technical, but Arthur understood the essential part. Someone had opened his throat so he could breathe. "The girl," he whispered. "A small girl. She was there." The nurse frowned. The EMT crew mentioned something about a disturbance, but when they arrived, the police had already taken a girl into custody for assault. Arthur felt an icy cold spread through his veins, colder than any medication. Assault. The girl who had given him air. The memory solidified in his mind. The panic of the crowd, the accusation in their eyes, her terrified face as she was dragged away. "No," he tried to say, but the word came out as a groan. "She didn't assault me. She saved me." He struggled to sit up, ignoring the sharp pain in his neck. "I need to speak to the police. They have made a terrible mistake." The nurse tried to calm him, insisting he needed rest, but Arthur barely heard her. The image of Leah's face, her desperate courage, was etched in his mind. He, a man whose net worth was built on risk calculations and logical decisions, owed his life to an act of pure, instinctive compassion from a child he barely knew. A child who, because of him, was now locked up, accused of a crime that was, in fact, an act of heroism. He thought of his lawyers, his power, his vast network of contacts. All his wealth and capital seemed useless if they couldn't correct this colossal injustice. "Get me my phone," he ordered the nurse, his voice gaining strength with the adrenaline of indignation. "Now, I have to make a call." The system that had swallowed his savior didn't know who it was dealing with. Arthur Graves wasn't just a rich man. He was a man who paid his debts, and he owed his life to Leah. The first few days in the detention center were a blur of silent humiliation. Leah moved through the gray hallways like a ghost, the accusation of assailant hanging over her. The other kids, older and hardened by the system, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. The story of how she got there, distorted and amplified by rumors, turned her into an outcast. "That's the girl who stabbed a rich guy at the airport," they whispered when she passed. Leah didn't try to defend herself. Hopelessness was like a heavy blanket, smothering her voice and her will. Her social worker, a woman named Ms. Davis, listened to her with an expression of rehearsed patience, but her eyes revealed what she really thought. Just another invented story to escape the consequences. "We'll look into it, Leah," she said at the end of the first session, the promise sounding hollow. The system had its narrative, and the truth of an undocumented street child didn't carry enough weight to change it. Meanwhile, Arthur Graves's fury transformed into an efficient, relentless machine. From his hospital bed, he mobilized his legal team. And find her, he ordered his chief counsel, a man named Benjamin Carter, whose reputation was as impeccable as his suits. "Her name is Leah, 10 years old. She was taken from the airport. I don't care about the costs, the resources, just find her." The search, however, proved more complicated than expected. The system seemed to conspire to keep Leah hidden. Airport records were vague, the police were evasive, and Child Protective Services was overwhelmed and slow. Every call from Carter hit a new wall of bureaucracy. It was as if the girl had been swallowed by a glitch in the system, an error no one wanted to admit. Arthur, frustrated and still recovering, used the only weapon he had left, his influence. He placed a call to the editor of a major newspaper, an old friend. He didn't tell the whole story, just enough to light a spark. "There's a story of heroism at the airport that's being suppressed," he said. "A story involving a child and a major injustice." The spark caught fire. A small article, buried in the local news section, appeared 2 days later. "Mystery at the Metropolitan Hub. Who saved billionaire Arthur Graves?" The article briefly mentioned the emergency procedure and the confusion involving an unidentified minor. It wasn't much, but it was enough. At the detention center, Leah's grim life continued its course. She was sitting in the cafeteria, pushing tasteless food around her plate, when one of the guards called her name. "Davis wants to see you now." Leah followed the guard to the social worker's office, her heart pounding with familiar fear. But the Ms. Davis waiting for her was different. Her professional boredom had vanished, replaced by nervous agitation. On her desk, next to a stack of files, lay the morning newspaper open to the Arthur Graves story. "Leah," she began, her voice strangely cautious, "we received a call from the attorney for a Mr. Arthur Graves." Leah looked up, her breath catching in her throat. Is he okay?" Ms. Davis hesitated, her eyes flicking from Leah's face to the newspaper. "He is fine, and he is looking for you. Apparently, your version of events may have some merit." It was the first sliver of light in the darkness, but the light brought with it an unexpected shadow. The office door opened, and 2 men in suits entered. They were not Arthur's team. Their smiles were cold, predatory. "Ms. Davis, we are from the law firm Miller and Finch," said the man in front. "We are here to represent the interests of young Leah. We've been informed of the incident and believe she has a very strong case for negligence against Mr. Graves for placing her in such a traumatic situation." Leah looked from one face to the other, confusion morphing into a new kind of fear. They weren't here to help her. They were here to use her story, to turn her act of salvation into a weapon against the only man who had treated her with kindness. The Miller and Finch lawyers, with their expensive shoes and oily smiles, turned Mrs. Davis's small office into a verbal battlefield. They spoke of emotional distress, fiduciary responsibility, and the negligence of an adult interacting with an unaccompanied minor. To Leah, the words were scary jargon, but the intention was clear. They wanted to sue Arthur. Mr. Graves, a man of immense fortune, gave a vulnerable child a significant amount of cash and then, through his own recklessness, created a panic situation that resulted in our client's trauma and wrongful detention, explained the lead attorney, whose name was Marcus Thorne. He spoke as if Leah wasn't there, as if she were an object, an asset to be exploited in a complex business game. Miss Davis, clearly intimidated, shuffled her papers, unsure how to react. The sudden arrival of high-caliber attorneys on behalf of a child in her custody was an unprecedented event. Leah, for her part, felt a wave of nausea. They were twisting the truth, painting Arthur's kindness as an irresponsible act. They were turning her savior into a villain. "I don't want to sue anyone," Leah said, her voice low but firm. "He was good to me. I just wanted to help." Thorne turned to her, his smile condescending. "Sweetheart, you don't understand the complexities of the law. We are here to protect you. Just imagine, with the settlement we can achieve, you'll never have to worry about anything again. A significant portion of his assets can secure your future." The idea was repulsive. They weren't talking about justice, they were talking about profit. They saw in her an opportunity to capitalize on Arthur's misfortune, a chance to carve out a slice of his vast net worth. Just then, Miss Davis's phone rang. She answered, her brow furrowed. After a few seconds of listening, she paled. "It's Benjamin Carter," she whispered, covering the mouthpiece. "Mr. Graves's attorney. He's in reception." Thorne and his colleague exchanged a look of triumph. The prey had walked into the trap. When Carter entered, the contrast with the other two lawyers was stark. He was older, with a calm bearing and eyes that conveyed intelligence and integrity. He ignored Thorne and addressed Leah directly. "Leah, my name is Ben. Mr. Graves sent me. He is very worried about you and wants to personally thank you for saving his life." The sincerity in his voice was a balm to Leah's wounded soul. For the first time since the airport, someone looked at her and saw a hero, not a criminal or an opportunity. "Is he really okay?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "He is recovering quickly thanks to you," Carter replied, "and he is furious about what happened. We are doing everything to get you out of here as fast as possible." Thorne interrupted, his tone arrogant. "I'm afraid it's not that simple, Carter. We now represent Miss Leah. Any discussions must go through us, and we are preparing a substantial lawsuit." Carter looked at Thorne as if observing a particularly unpleasant insect. "You don't represent anyone until a judge appoints a legal guardian for this child. And rest assured, we will do everything to ensure that guardian is not an opportunistic vulture." The tension in the room was palpable. Leah was trapped in the middle, the prize in a legal dispute she didn't fully understand. On one side, men who wanted to use her pain for profit. On the other, the promise of help from the man whose life she had saved. The complexity of her situation was crushing her. She was no longer just a girl who had done the right thing. She was a piece in a chess game involving power, money, and a billionaire's reputation. The cell door seemed further and further away. Benjamin Carter's arrival was like a stone thrown into a stagnant pond, creating waves that spread throughout the system. The news that billionaire Arthur Graves was personally involved in the case of the airport assailant girl changed everything. Suddenly, Leah's story was no longer the delusion of a street child. It was crucial testimony. Ms. Davis's office became the epicenter of a legal battle. Carter, with his methodical and calm approach, filed an emergency petition with the juvenile court, requesting Leah's immediate release and the appointment of a neutral guardian ad litem to represent her best interests. Marcus Thorne and his team counterattacked, arguing that Leah was traumatized and vulnerable to manipulation by the rich man who caused her suffering. Their fight was noisy and full of legal maneuvering, but for Leah, the deepest conflict was happening silently within herself. During one of Carter's visits, he brought a tablet and showed her a video message from Arthur. He was still in the hospital, looking pale, with a bandage on his neck, but his blue eyes were clear and filled with overwhelming gratitude. "Leah," he said, his voice still hoarse, "I don't have the words to thank you. You were brave and brilliant. What happened to you is a terrible injustice, and I promise I will move heaven and earth to fix it. Please be strong. Help is on the way." Seeing his face, hearing his promise, was an immense relief, but it also awakened an old pain. His kindness reminded her of a world she had lost, a world with care and protection, and that made her think of her mother. The nights she practiced bandaging her dolls while her mother patiently guided her, the pride in her mother's eyes when Leah recited the names of the human bones. These were the moments that shaped her, that gave her the knowledge to save Arthur. But they were also the memories that haunted her, for they were intrinsically linked to her loss and the reason she was alone. One day, Mrs. Davis called her into her office. There was a new file on her desk. "Leah, we received your records from the group home you ran away from," she said, her tone softer than usual. The mention of the group home made Leah's stomach clench. It was the place she was sent after her mother's death, a place of rigid rules and little compassion, where her curiosity was seen as insubordination and her sadness as a problem to be medicated. "The director wrote a note here," Miss Davis continued, reading the paper. "He says you were a difficult child, prone to fantasies, and that you stole medical texts from the infirmary." Leah was paralyzed. Stole. She never stole. The nurse, a kind elderly woman, seeing her passion, let her borrow the books. But she was long gone, replaced by someone who saw only rules and infractions. That note, written by a man who barely knew her, was poison, a lie that now became part of her official record, reinforcing the narrative that she was a troubled and unreliable child. It was the perfect obstacle for her detractors. Thorne and his team could use it to paint her as a chronic liar. The prosecution could use it to validate the assault charge. It was her word, a 10-year-old runaway, against that of an institution. The system that was supposed to protect her was, in fact, building her cage, brick by brick, with the lies of the past. The revelation of the group home report was a devastating blow, but Benjamin Carter was not a man easily rattled. "Lies on paper are still lies, Leah," he said during his next visit, his eyes fixed firmly on hers. "The truth carries more weight. We just need to find a way to make it heard." He began working on a new strategy. Instead of just fighting the bureaucracy, he decided to bring the truth to light. With Arthur's permission, he hired a medical expert, a renowned trauma surgeon, to analyze the case. Dr. Evans, a man with grey hair and a serious expression, examined the photos of Arthur's injury and read the EMT reports. His conclusion was unequivocal. "Whoever performed this procedure," he said in a recorded deposition, "not only saved Mr. Graves's life, but did so with remarkable precision. The depth, the angle, the location. It's the kind of procedure medical students take months to master in simulators. To do it under pressure, with an improvised instrument like a pen, in a chaotic environment. It's not just skill, it's a gift." Dr. Evans's words were a powerful weapon for Leah's defense. But the battle was far from over. The prosecution, sensing the public and institutional pressure not to admit such a grave error, doubled down. They introduced a new complication, Leah's status. As an undocumented minor without identified legal guardians, they argued that she posed a flight risk and, worse, raised the possibility of deportation. "We don't know where she came from. We have no birth certificate," the prosecutor said in a preliminary hearing. By the rules, she could be deemed an illegal immigrant and sent to a repatriation center. The threat was terrifying. Being sent to an unknown place, a country she might never have known, was a fate worse than the detention center. It was complete erasure. Leah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She was born here, in this city. Her mother was buried in a small cemetery on the outskirts, but without papers to prove it. Her existence was questionable in the eyes of the law. Arthur's situation was also complicated. The Miller and Finch lawyers, seeing their plan to sue him on Leah's behalf failing, changed tactics. They began leaking information to the tabloid press, painting Arthur as an irresponsible billionaire whose careless generosity toward an unstable street girl had caused the whole incident. Articles with flashy headlines appeared online. Millionaire's handout that almost ended in tragedy. The attack on his reputation was calculated, an attempt to pressure him into a settlement, to pay for the problem to disappear. Arthur, however, refused to yield. Every attack only strengthened his resolve. He now saw that he was not just fighting for Leah. He was fighting against a cynical system that punished compassion and rewarded greed. He used his resources not to defend himself, but to counterattack. He hired a team of private investigators. Their mission: find the truth about Leah's past, unearth proof of her identity, and, most importantly of all, locate the one thing that could unequivocally prove what happened at that airport, the security camera footage. But when his investigators requested the tapes, they hit a new, insurmountable stone wall. The airport administration, after days of evasiveness, finally gave an official response. The recordings from the day of the incident, from that specific time and location, had been regrettably lost due to a technical failure. The news of the lost security footage was a punch to the gut for everyone fighting for Leah. For Benjamin Carter, it was confirmation of his worst suspicions. Technical failures happened, but the coincidence was too blatant to ignore. "They are covering it up, Arthur," he said on the phone. His voice strained with frustration. Someone at the airport failed. The security guards were slow to act. No one recognized a clear medical emergency. They'd rather let a child be crucified than admit their own incompetence. The tapes aren't lost, they're buried. For Leah, the news was even more devastating. Those tapes were her evidence, the silent eyewitness that could validate her story beyond any doubt. Without them, it was her word against dozens of frightened adults, and the weight of a system that refused to admit fault. The hope that had begun to blossom in her chest started to wither, replaced by the familiar cold of resignation. Perhaps her fate was always this: to be misunderstood, judged, and punished for trying to do good. The custody hearing was scheduled. It was the deciding moment. The judge would rule whether Leah would remain in state custody, facing potential criminal charges and deportation, or whether Arthur's petition to assume temporary guardianship would be granted. The courtroom was imposing and cold, a place where humanity seemed to be squeezed out by formalities and legal jargon. Leah, sitting next to Carter in a new blazer he had bought for her, felt small and insignificant. Across the room was the prosecutor, a severe-faced man, and in a corner, Marcus Thorne watched, his face a mask of professional interest, still hoping for an opportunity to profit from the outcome. Arthur, against his doctor's advice, was present. He sat in the front row, his posture erect, his gaze fixed on the judge, a lion ready to defend his savior. His presence filled the room, a silent reminder of the power and net worth at stake. The prosecutor argued first, his voice echoing through the room. He painted a picture of Leah as a dangerous unknown. He cited the group home report, the lack of documents, the very violent act of puncturing a man's throat. "We don't know who she is, Your Honor. We don't know what she is capable of. The state has a duty to act with caution." When it was Carter's turn, he spoke with contained passion. He presented Dr. Evans's testimony, highlighting Leah's skill and courage. He spoke of Arthur's gratitude and the injustice of punishing a heroic act. "We are here today because this girl saw a human being in danger, and instead of fleeing like so many others, she acted. She used the knowledge her mother gave her to save a life. The system, in its haste to find a culprit, failed to recognize a hero." The judge, a middle-aged woman with a face that revealed little, listened to everything in silence. The tension in the room was almost unbearable. Leah felt everyone's eyes on her, dissecting her, judging her. Her future was being decided by strangers, based on fragments of her life, many of them distorted or false. Carter had one last card to play. He called his first and only witness. The defense calls Arthur Graves to the stand. A murmur swept through the room. Arthur rose slowly and walked to the stand, each step echoing in the silent room. He took the oath, his voice steady, and sat down, turning to face not the lawyer, but directly the judge. And for an instant, his gaze met Leah's, a silent promise passing between them. "Mr. Graves," Carter began, his calm voice filling the courtroom silence, "can you describe for the court, in your own words, what happened on the day of the incident at the airport?" Arthur took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving the judge. He didn't speak as a billionaire or a business magnate. He spoke as a man who had stared death in the face. He described the business call, the distraction, the first sign that something was wrong, the tightness in his throat, the sudden inability to draw air. His narrative was raw and visceral. He spared no details about the terror, the darkness invading his vision, the overwhelming certainty that he was dying. "I was on the floor, surrounded by people, but completely alone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "No one knew what to do. They were just watching, paralyzed. And then I saw a face." He paused, turning to look directly at Leah. "I saw this girl's face. Amidst all the panic, she was the only person who didn't look scared. She looked focused. She knew what was happening." The prosecutor rose. "Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Graves could not possibly know what the minor was thinking." "Overruled," the judge said, her eyes fixed on Arthur. "Continue, Mr. Graves." "She didn't hesitate," Arthur continued, his voice gaining strength. "She ran right to me. Ignoring everyone and everything, I felt her small hands on my neck, searching for something, and then I felt a sharp pain, and right after that, air. The sweetest sound I've ever heard in my life was the sound of air entering my lungs again. This girl, Your Honor, did not attack me. She gave me breath when mine had run out. She gave me my life back." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by a muffled sob from Leah. Arthur's words were the validation she had desperately longed for, the truth spoken aloud in a place of power. The prosecutor, realizing he was losing ground, went on the attack in his cross-examination. "Mr. Graves, you are a man of immense wealth and influence, are you not? Your net worth is estimated in the billions of dollars." "My finances are not relevant here," Arthur replied coldly. "I would argue they are," the prosecutor countered. "Could it be possible that you, feeling guilty for creating a dangerous situation, are now trying to protect this child, perhaps exaggerating her role to ease your own conscience?" The insinuation was venomous. Arthur looked at the prosecutor with icy contempt. "Conscience? Let me tell you about conscience. My conscience tells me that if it weren't for Leah, my vast fortune, my businesses, my investments in stocks, crypto, and gold would have meant nothing, because I'd be dead. My conscience tells me that the system you represent took a hero and locked her in a cell. My conscience tells me we are wasting time discussing my finances when an innocent child's freedom is at stake." His voice echoed through the room, filled with an authority that went beyond his wealth. It was the authority of conviction. He turned again to the judge. "Your Honor, I know the evidence is circumstantial. I know the security tapes disappeared, but I ask you to look at her. Look at this 10-year-old child who, in a moment of crisis, demonstrated more courage and clarity of thought than any adult in that room. This is not the act of a criminal. It is the act of someone with a rare gift. To punish that would not just be an injustice, it would be a sin." He finished, his chest heaving. The room was in stunned silence. The judge looked from Arthur to Leah, and for the first time, her impassive face softened with something that looked like understanding. She picked up her gavel, but before she could strike it, a bailiff hurried into the room and handed her an envelope. She opened it, read the contents, and her eyes widened. She looked at the prosecutor, then at Carter, and finally at Arthur. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice carrying a new weight, "it appears new evidence has just surfaced. The airport security footage was not lost, after all." The judge's declaration dropped onto the courtroom like a bomb. Marcus Thorne straightened in his chair, smelling a twist in the air. The prosecutor paled, looking genuinely surprised. Benjamin Carter and Arthur exchanged a look of cautious triumph. The judge explained that an anonymous airport employee, plagued by guilt, had delivered a copy of the recordings to a local news channel, which in turn handed it over to the authorities. A technician quickly prepared the video for display. The large screens on the courtroom wall came to life, showing the grainy, black-and-white image of the airport concourse. The entire room held its breath. The video showed everything, exactly as Leah and Arthur had described. Arthur's kindness outside, the purchase of the peanuts, his distracted business call. Then, the collapse. The camera captured the crowd's panic. The inaction of the security guards who stood yards away, chatting among themselves. And then it showed Leah, a small, determined figure running against the tide of inertia. The image was unmistakable. There was no aggression. There was desperation, precision, and a breathtaking act of salvation. The video showed the relief on her face, followed immediately by the terror as she was grabbed and dragged away. When the lights came on, a heavy silence hung over the room. The truth, naked and raw, had been exposed. The prosecution's narrative fell apart into dust. The judge looked at the prosecutor, her eyebrows raised. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and, with a voice stripped of its former arrogance, said, "Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, the state drops all charges against the minor." The judge struck her gavel. "Case dismissed." But she didn't stop there. "And let the record reflect," she added, her voice sharp, "that this court will initiate a full investigation into the conduct of the airport administration and the juvenile detention center in this matter. Justice did not fail this child today." Leah felt as if a 200-pound weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Warm, silent tears rolled down her face, tears not of sadness, but of an relief so profound it hurt. Arthur, ignoring all protocol, rose and went to her. He knelt in front of her, just as he had done outside the airport, and placed his hands on her shoulders. "It's over, Leah. You are safe now." In the days that followed, the story exploded in the media. Leah, the assailant girl, was rebranded as the airport angel. The investigation promised by the judge led to suspensions and a complete overhaul of the airport's emergency protocols. Marcus Thorne and his firm quietly vanished, their attempt at exploitation exposed by the truth. Arthur fulfilled his promise. He used his lawyers not to punish, but to build. First, they located Leah's birth certificate and her mother's death certificate, establishing her citizenship and identity once and for all. The slanderous group home report was challenged and removed from her file. Then came the most important step. In a private hearing, with Leah by his side, Arthur Graves, the solitary billionaire whose life was filled with deals and managing his capital, made the most important request of his life. He asked to adopt Leah. "She didn't just save my life," he told the judge. "She reminded me of what truly matters: compassion, courage. She is the best legacy I could leave to the world. I want to give her the home and the opportunities she deserves." Leah, who had spent her life learning to expect nothing from anyone, heard the words and felt something new and fragile blossom in her heart, the hope of belonging somewhere. When the judge asked if she consented, she looked at Arthur's gentle face, and for the first time in years, her future didn't look like a dark, lonely road, but an open, bright horizon. She nodded, a small gesture that sealed her new beginning. 4 weeks after that fateful encounter, Leah's world was unrecognizable. The oppressive grey of the detention center was replaced by the warm colors and soft light of Arthur's home. An elegant residence with more windows than walls, overlooking a vibrant garden. The silence that was once filled with loneliness was now punctuated by laughter, conversations about the day, and the sound of Arthur trying, without much success, to learn the rules of a board game Leah loved. She had her own room, painted in her favorite shade of blue, with a bookshelf Arthur insisted on filling with every book she could wish for. Her mother's old medical manuals, recovered from a storage unit where her few belongings had been kept, now occupied a place of honor alongside new, gleaming volumes on biology and anatomy. He enrolled her in a prestigious private school, known for its advanced science program. At first, she felt like an outsider, a small vessel adrift in a sea of starched uniforms and designer backpacks. But her sharp intellect and genuine passion for learning quickly made her a standout student. She discovered that the knowledge her mother had given her was not just a set of survival tools, but the foundation of a vocation. Arthur, in turn, was also transformed. The man who lived for the next deal, the increase in his cash flow, and the profitability of his investments, discovered a new kind of wealth, the joy of watching Leah devour a book, the satisfaction of helping her with homework, the sound of her footsteps through the house. These were the new dividends of his life, a type of profit no stock market investment could match. He established a foundation in Leah's mother's name, dedicated to providing scholarships for disadvantaged children who dreamed of pursuing careers in healthcare. One day, they returned to the airport. It was no longer a place of trauma, but of triumph. On the wall of the new emergency medical center, a bronze plaque gleamed. It read, "In honor of Leah's courage, who reminded us that a hero can be found anywhere and that a single act of compassion can change the world." The exact area where she had performed the tracheotomy had been converted into a modern training facility, where airport employees now learned advanced first aid, ensuring no one else would have to rely on a child's heroism to survive. As they stood there, holding hands, looking at the plaque, Leah remembered the scared, hungry girl who sat outside those same doors. It felt like a lifetime ago. She was no longer invisible. She was seen, loved, and had a purpose. She knew the path ahead would have its challenges, but she was no longer afraid. The courage that made her run toward danger was the same courage that would help her navigate her new world. She looked at Arthur, whose smile reflected the pride and affection he felt for her. He, who had almost lost everything, had gained the most precious thing, a family, and she, who had nothing, discovered that knowledge and compassion were the greatest treasures of all. Together, they turned and walked away from the past, toward a future where a silver metal pen was not a symbol of assault, but of a miracle. A reminder that sometimes, to save a life, you must first pierce the surface to let the air in, and with it, hope.